Well, I really thought I was going to talk about how to grow magic mushrooms for fun and profit, but I guess we'll have to talk about vine crops. All right, Leo, let's go through this magical world of vine crops. Start off with what are they? We have 4 squash groups. We have the pepo group, which is our summer squashes and most of our pumpkins, acorn squashes, spaghetti squashes. The next group is our machada group, which is our butternuts, necks, and calabazas and processing pumpkins. And then the big ones, maximas, that's your giant pumpkins, your hubbards, and your buttercups and kabuka types. Then an odd group, the cushaw group. So that gets us through our cucurbitas, our squashes. Then going in our cucumber group, that's your Cucumis sativus. That's all your pickling and sliced cucumbers, except for one really bizarre type. And that's the Armenian types. That's actually in the Cucumis melo. So that and the melons, cantaloupes, honeydews, specialty melons are in this group. Notice how they're very closely related. And then the ones that's a little bit more of an outlier is our citrullus group, which gives us our watermelons and our citrons. Now, with that said, a lot of the vine crops have some interesting similarities, particularly disease profiles, insect profiles, and so a lot of times, a lot of our management practices are going to be similar. We also have these things, these edible gourds. Believe it or not, we have quite a bit of this growing in the region. Anybody know what that is? That's bitter gourd. It is as it said. It's bitter. It's like eating medicine. So I was on a farm just a few weeks ago that had trellis bitter gourds. And then bottle gourds uses a rootstock for some of our grafting work. And then some other of our loofahs, of course, you know, the sponge crop. Then Brett Loy up in New Hampshire, he's developed interspecific crosses, and we use those interspecific crosses. We're crossing 2 or more species of the cucurbita for rootstocks, processing pumpkins, which is usually you can't cross between species, so that's interesting. Then, of course, over the years, they've developed different vining forms, so usually you have a really trailing type. And what the breeders have done over the years is to breed those into bush and semi-bush types. But we still have plenty of our crops that are small, medium vine, long vine types. But the trend with breeders has been to breed more compact forms. We get more plants per acre. We can get more yield per acre with these more compact forms. Our cucurbits are monoecious. That means they have both male and female flowers on the same plant, with some exceptions we'll talk about. Muskmelons have a hermaphroditic flower, which is both male and female, plus male flowers. And then we'll talk about the different types that we've developed from those. So one of the types is our mostly female flower, gynoecious types. We use these in cucumbers. So if you buy a cucumber packet nowadays of hybrid cucumbers, it's not just one variety. It's a variety plus a pollinizer for our mostly female types. Because these won't produce many male flowers, so you have to put a male in there, probably 10%, somewhere in that range, 7 to 15% male. A monoecious type that will produce both a lot of male flowers along with female flowers. Cucurbit crops require pollination by insects, with one exception, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So this is one of those crops that's really critical for bee management. And we have both the use of honeybees, bumblebees, and we have some native bees that really help us out in some of our squash crops. But for the most part, we're going to be putting beehives in these fields, and managing those beehives oftentimes is going to be a key to success. So that's what your male flowers look like. By the way, you can sell those to restaurants, real high price. They like dip them in batter, make tempura out of that kind of stuff. So you can just grow these for flowers. Easier than growing the melons, right? Then the female flowers, you can tell them because they have the little fruits. It looks like what the fruit's going to become. So generally, we're using honeybees for pollination. We've done work with bumblebees, and we do have commercial bumblebees out there. We found in our research, I had a graduate student that worked with us for a number of years, that these do well in watermelons. They do well in pumpkins, squashes. They don't do well in cucumbers. They just don't like cucumber flowers. The other thing that we have is a bunch of native pollinators, but particularly we have the squash bee. So if you're in a pumpkin field, you're in a squash field, a winter squash field, oftentimes the majority of pollination is being done by these are solitary bees. They're in the ground. And so this is one, if you manage your habitat for them, you can get a lot of advantage out of these. They tend to live overnight. They're in the flower overnight oftentimes. So you'll see that flower open up, there's a bee that's crawling out of it. They've co-evolved over the years with squash, so it's one of those things, these bees are just, the two go together. Remember that these flowers are only open for a few hours. If they don't get pollinated in those few hours, they're going to open up early in the morning, then you don't get the fruit set. So if you're doing something or the weather's not conducive, that means you're not going to get fruit set on that day. We get a lot of fruit abortion. Heat can cause fruit abortion, lack of pollination, of course, and oftentimes we have a carrying capacity of that plant. So a watermelon is going to carry at any one time how many fruits? A seedless watermelon, 15-pound seedless watermelon. Going to carry 2 to 4. If you're doing really bad, it's going to carry 1. So the idea is to increase that carrying capacity. A jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, a 15-pound pumpkin, how many is the plant going to carry? 1 to 2. And so what we're trying to manage is to manage that crop so that it can carry more. That means you need good leaf area. You need to maintain the health of those leaves. I work quite a bit with parthenocarpic pickling cucumbers. Parthenocarpy is producing fruits without pollination. And so this has been a trend. We have all those English cucumbers you see in the grocery stores now in the wintertime, those are all parthenocarpic. We have parthenocarpic types we use in high tunnels. And so this gets rid of the whole idea of needing bees. So I always tell the people, say, oh, the bees, the bees. I say, well, we'll just develop parthenocarpic stuff, right? We do have parthenocarpy in squash, too. So a lot of our zucchinis actually will produce fruit if they don't get pollinated. So that's an interesting thing. So we can develop this trait more. Now, the key is, how do you get seed from a seedless plant? I'll let you think about that for a while. All right, so let's start off with muskmelons and specialty melons. What has the industry done as far as breeding in muskmelons? Well, they've developed that Athena class, so that's that more smooth netted rind, not the deep sutures. Kind of came off the old Satakoy variety that we used to have many, many years ago, and that's become our industry standard niche. So almost everything we're growing is off of that, what we call Athena class. And they've put powdery mildew resistance, race 1 and 2 into those, and we generally have fusarium resistance in those. Now, they develop different sizes, so you have the bigger ones and smaller ones, but in general, that's going to be what we're growing here as far as our major cantaloupe or muskmelon type. And the key there is that powdery mildew resistance. So it doesn't mean they're totally resistant. It means that they have enough resistance that we do have reduced sprays for powdery mildew. They're developing more and more specialty types. We have a specialty trial out this year. We had all kinds of wackadoodle stuff. We had a Taiwanese company that sent us melons that kind of were a sweet, sour taste to them. So there'll be all kinds of things that are available to you. The question is there a market for them? Fairly high nitrogen, we need a lot of potassium. We need that potassium for development of sugars in the crop. We talked about that before. also magnesium and boron. So if you don't have, you're not managing nutrients well, you can get crappy tasting melons. What's the other way you get crappy tasting melons? Poor disease control. You can get good sized melons, but if those leaves are in poor shape as far as disease, they'll taste crappy. And then anything after about the 10th of September tastes crappy anyway. True, unless you're in a high tunnel or something like that. So foliage health, we do have cucumber beetle issues with melons, including some bacterial wilt carried by them. We have manganese toxicity issues in them. And the big issue here is voiding gluts. So they tend to come off times. Like this year, did they kind of come off all at once, the first crop? Yeah. All right, so you really have to do as much as you can to spread out your plantings. And of course, pollination is key here. But for fruit quality, for you to get good quality melons, you have to manage your nutrients and your leaf health. The breeders have bred for higher sugars over the years, but there's the eastern shippers, they've bred for having those characteristics of the Athena class. So we have information in our vegetable recommendation books on the type, days, this is relative days, and then disease resistance and the size. We have some information on canary, the Galia melons, and then some specialty melons. We'll have more of that information in next year's guide. So we do trials. This is one we did a number of years ago, but Penn State does trials. And when we put that information into the recommendation books, it is based on that. But suffice to say, any of those Athena class cantaloupe do well. It just, do you want a big one? Do you want a medium-sized one? So what they look like, you can see very little suture on those classes there. And then there's still some sutured types out there which, again, aren't as much in favor. They tend to have a little soft on the stem end and do crack a little bit more. One of the things that we do look at is, are some sweeter? Question to you, can you sell a sweeter cantaloupe? Once they taste it. So, but here you can see Goddess and Minerva. They're doing pretty well. Those are two standards that we use in the area. We have information on the specialty types, and we're going to add to this. We tend to do pretty well with canary melons here. Charente don't do well at all. Christmas melons do well. They're developed better, more crack-resistant honeydews. Of course, we have plenty of muskmelons. There's some Tuscan types that are also being grown successfully here. So just looking at some more of those types. So we have our green flesh types, smooth skin types. What has been the issue with our growers in growing cantaloupes? Why have they dropped growing cantaloupes oftentimes in our region? Yeah, for food safety issues. They just don't want to have the risk. And so it's the netted melons that are going to be the worst. So we were thinking that maybe some of these smooth types could be alternatives. We found some smooth types with good orange flesh, good sweetness, nice cantaloupe flavors. So that might be a way to get back in the market. And again, just some information from some past work. Sprite's kind of an interesting story. There's only one company that sells it anymore, and they don't advertise it because they keep it kind of in that Georgia to North Carolina area. But this was a Oriental melon that was developed in the North Carolina Specialty Crops Program that they found. They worked with the companies to evaluate a whole bunch of Oriental melons. This one came out very well, and then they commercialized the whole specialty industry from that. So that's something I would be interested in, trying to find a specialty melon that would fit our region that we can market as, you know, for our growers. But you can see we can get some solid, anything above 12 really tastes really good. Above 10, it has to be above 10 to even taste good. But when you get up into the 15s and such, those are super sweet types. So we can get some in that up in that area. And Sprite, Amy was a small canary melon, also in that category. just what they look like.
Can you affect the taste with the Epsom salt application?
You can influence the sugar ability of the plant to accumulate sugars with magnesium. Why is that? You're keeping the plants green because, you know, magnesium is involved in chlorophyll production. Potassium, that's with the sugar transfer and the solutes in the cell. And then boron is also available for sugar transport. So you need to balance all those. And of course, you can get things out of whack. The one way you can make melons taste crappy is to over-fertilize them with nitrogen. All right, watermelons. Big crop in our region. We're one of the northernmost growing regions for seedless watermelons. We compete with what area of the world? No. Indiana. So our major competitor is Indiana during our growing season. I've been out to that area. Anybody been to French Lick, Indiana? There you go. Who was from French Lick? Larry Bird.
They got a bunch of watermelons.
They do. But you know, not their claim to fame is Larry Bird came from French Lick. He's the hick from French Lick, they call him. But what we're looking for is wide adaptation seedless varieties, and then we've got to be careful on our pollinizer selection. So this system, you need your seedless watermelon, then you need a pollen source it's going to produce male flowers, because essentially the male flowers on the seedless type are sterile. Or if they're not sterile, they just don't produce pollen that can fertilize the seedless watermelon. So pollination is a big key here. You get bad batch bees in your field, you can have pollination issues. You can have hollow heart issues. Rotation. You were in Kate's talk. What's the minimum rotation that we want to see watermelons on Delaware or any of the region here?
3 years.
5. 7 would be great. Is there a field anywhere near Laurel that has never had watermelon on it? No. So if you can get what they call virgin ground that hasn't had watermelons on for 10 years, that's, you know, you're looking for that. So rotation's key. Don't need a lot of nitrogen compared to some of the other crops. We really top out at 150 pounds of nitrogen. Potassium for fruit quality. Then almost all of our growers, although there's a movement to try to do some strip till and no-till, most everybody's still on plastic mulch with drip irrigation. But the key, again, for yield is foliage and vine health and getting that pollination so you get good set. We've got plenty of pests and plenty of diseases. So gummy stem blight is, we've got more anthracnose now in the region as far as diseases. The industry's worked on anthracnose. They don't have gummy stem blight resistance. The other thing that the industry's working on is getting race 2 fusarium resistance into watermelons. They have it. It just will be a while till we see it. And heaven help us, they can't even agree that race 3 exists. So, but the industry's working toward that. Now, on the other end, on watermelons, grafted watermelons are used. In Asia, that would be 100% of the watermelons are grafted. In Spain, most of the watermelons are grafted. Italy, most of the watermelons are grafted. Here, not so much. And so there's been a lot of research going on in grafted watermelons. We have a company out in North Carolina called Tristel that produces them commercially, and they're trying to get the cost down because they cost about 3 times as much as our regular types. And we'll talk more about grafting. But one of the things they developed is rootstocks that have both fusarium and root knot nematode resistance. There's one called, is it Clemson Strongback or South Carolina Strongback? But something that says Strongback, and it'll be one that has both resistances. Carolina Strongback, that's what it is. So that's been released, and hopefully we'll see that as a rootstock coming up in the future. We have this in our guide where we look at the type of watermelon, the size, and then some of the resistances. These would be your fusarium resistance, some anthracnose resistance, which we'll see later. And we categorize them as early, mid, and late. We have very few early watermelons. So that's one where the industry's not really developed, after Melody, the ones that we've had forever. There's really not a lot of good early watermelons. Maybe Secretariat is one that's been developed in recent times. That's something is a need. So talk to your industry about getting more early watermelons. Because the earlier we can get in the market and start shipping north, we can make more money. That's where a lot of times the big money is, right, Brian?
That's right.
So
Make that big money.
we still have seeded types. By the way, what does most of the rest of the world eat? Watermelons. Do they eat seedless watermelons? No, they eat seeded watermelons. One of the biggest countries for eating watermelon is Japan. They eat a good amount. Korea, they eat a good amount. China eats a lot. But this is one that you say more in the Middle East way, please, that area.
Israel?
They produce a lot. Turkey. Turkey is a big watermelon eating country. And they're mostly all seeded watermelons and grafted. All right, so this is what we're looking at. So this is what the industry standard is right now. It's that stripe type with dark rind, slightly oblong, with a deep red flesh. The variety that is our standard now, it's called Fascination, and has been and is continuing to be, even though there are lots of other choices out there. Dark rind types, not so much. That's mostly a local thing. And then we have some more round types or real dark rind types. Again, they don't like the black ones in the market so much, but they'll take a really dark round type. And then we have some odd things like yellow and orange seedless, just specialty markets for those. Again, what happened to seeded watermelons? Well, all the companies have big seeded watermelon programs because they sell a mess of them overseas. We use these sometimes as our pollen sources for producing seedless. All right, so one of the other issues with growing these is the transplants aren't that easy to produce. There are certainly people that know how to do it. We get a lot of our transplants out of Georgia, for example, and those folks know how to do it. What we need to do to get these out of the ground is generally put them in a germination chamber for 2 days, about 85 degrees. And then once they come out of there, that gets them going, then we can put them in a production house. If you just put regular seedless watermelons in a 70-degree it might take it sometimes. So it really needs that high temperatures for a short period of time. The industry has moved to special pollinizers over the years. So instead of having a seeded type to provide the pollen, they'll put a one that produces a little seeded melon, but it's inconspicuous. We don't ever harvest the melon. We use it as a male flower producing plant in the system. One I don't have up here is the SP series from Syngenta. They're up to SP7 now. That's their latest special pollinizer 7. I couldn't get a picture of that, but there are some. Last year we had an issue with Accomplice. Accomplice went down last year, so I don't think we're going to see this being used anymore.
Is that the one that crashed in the heat?
It crashed. It gets a lot of problems, but it got several fields where it just died, melted out, probably fusarium. So the company in literature says it has fusarium resistance, and then when you talk to them, say, no, it doesn't. So that was kind of frustrating. But we'll get that. The wild card didn't have any fusarium resistance. Then they bred some into it. So, and then some of them didn't have any anthracnose resistance. They bred them into some of them. So you want to make sure if you're going to have a pollen source, that's one that will actually survive the life cycle in the field. This is the pollination system that's pretty much taken over most of industry, which is kind of interesting. Is they'll have in the tray, they'll plant seedless, and then in the next cell they'll plant a seedless with a pollinizer in the same cell. And then seedless, seedless, and then, so when you take that tray to the field, you don't have to train your workers that here's your pollinizer, here's your seedless. They just pull them out of the tray, and it's kind of, you don't have to do any additional training. In the old days, you would do this. One guy the two people on the water wheel would be planting the seedless. Then you had one sitting in the back on a separate seat. They'd be putting in the pollinizer.
Or you make the pollinizer guy just walk.
Yeah, or you make them walk, yeah. This is how we started off. A row of seeded, 2 rows of seedless. Pretty, idiot-free, right? Unless you didn't plant this one, which has happened. Or every 4th hole, you just put one in. This is the system we used for many years, where planted 3 seedless, and then between the 3rd and 4th, we put in a pollinizer. So it's not a simple system. It requires a little bit of extra work to make sure you get the pollen source in with the seedless. So as one of the issues we have with watermelons is trying to get crown sets. Crown sets are those watermelons that are produced in the first 5 to 10 nodes, but really the ones that are up on the plastic. Usually that's oftentimes, particularly the early plantings, it's in late May that they're setting. It can be cool conditions, and oftentimes we get problems with that, and the reason is we're just not getting the pollen transfer from the insects, from the bees. So my recommendations for early plantings is put a couple extra hives in. It's worth the effort. It's worth it. Or actually plant twice as many pollinizers in here so you have more pollen. So you're working more pollen. Again, we need that transfer by bees. Fruit set, you can tell if it isn't set because they drop off. So here's the issue that we have with getting good watermelon set. That's with reduced pollen transfer. And usually it's reduced bee flights due to cold weather, windy weather, or rainy, stormy weather. Bees will fly, but they don't fly as far from their hive. So how are you going to manage that? All right, so how do you do that? Put your hives closer to the plants. Instead, where do most of the hives go? On the edge of the field. You got to start spacing them through the field. Not a lot of beekeepers are going to want to do that, so you have to work with them to do that. Poor colony strength. We had some poor colonies come in over the years, and that'll reduce your fruit set. Of course, bee kills. Bumblebees. We did a lot of work with bumblebees for a couple of years. They do work, but a lot of folks can't see them working. They'll say, what are they doing there? I can't see one. Well, one bumblebee does the work of 15 honeybees. So you don't need as many.
How do they manage, like, putting the hives throughout there? How do they manage the spray schedule?
Yeah, I know. But I would like to at least put it at the pivot point and at both ends of the field. But yeah, trying to intersperse them any more than that gets a little bit. But the more that you can get it, or put them all 4 edges of the field. All right, so we conduct seedless watermelon variety trials yearly, and you can find that on our website. This is last year's report. Just showing you some of the varieties. What's very interesting here is some of the old ones. 7187 is it's an old Abbott and Cobb variety that now Nunham's owns, which is now, it was Bayer, what are they now? BASF? Anyway, it's gone through a bunch of company changes. It's still, it's an ugly looking watermelon. It's kind of light color, but it's widely adapted. It'll grow up here in colder weather, warm weather, it'll stand the heat. It'll grow in Florida. So there's something to be said for having that wide adaptation. So our newer companies, we have an Israeli company that's really coming into market heavily, and so you'll see their varieties in here like Maxima and Talca. 2017, oldie but goodie, Crunchy Red. Who thought? That's one that our industry dropped about 2014. Had problems in 2012 with heat. Nobody's growing anymore. Plus, it takes forever to ripen. And if you think it's ripe, it's not. Wait a week. But still, can't beat the yields. But here are some of the newer ones. Seminus got back into watermelons. And their claim to fame is that they're going to breed a sweeter watermelon. And they do. All their watermelons are slightly higher sugar content. Can you sell that? Don't know. They'll give you the promotional material if you want it. But Bottle Rocket would be one of theirs, for example. And then 2018, you see Maxima up there. So why aren't we all growing Maximas? One, because it's like this, so a lot of oversize. You know, we don't want anything over about 22 pounds. And then it's round, so it kind of rolls. We don't like round. We like it slightly oblong. So anyway, we do this yearly now and have fun pitching watermelons. I'm getting too old for doing that, but you can see some of the Origine. These is an Israeli company really doing well. So these are the ones that did well over all 3 years. You know, oldies. But Fascination, which is our industry standard. It's not the highest yielding, but it looks pretty and it sells. Some of the others, you can see two of the newer ones from Seminus, Road Trip and Bottle Rock. And just to show you what you're looking at, we'll have this information in all our variety trials where we show what it looks like, what it yielded, and then counts. What does the industry generally want? They want a 45 count. That just means there's 45 in a bin. That's what sells the most. Until there's too many 45s, and then they want what? 60s or 34s or 32s. But you can see what they're dark rind, deep red flesh. That's what they want. The Seminus, a little lighter rind color. So I don't know how well they're going to stack up. And Charismatic, that's a Cicada variety. Then for the last 2 years, we've done many watermelons. And you can see a wide range of rind covers here. The one that's just both 2 years in a row that's far above better than everything else. It's called Ecstasy. And that's from Hazara. All right, so we spend a lot of times with watermelons. Brian sprays a lot of watermelons. So over the years, we've done work with grafted watermelons. Why do we want to graft watermelons? Because of fusarium wilt. So they've developed rootstocks that are resistant to fusarium wilt. They use bottle gourd or an interspecific cucurbit crosses. The only problem with that in the past is they've had root knot nematode susceptibility. Now they have one with that Carolina strongback that gives us both, which is actually citron is what is that space of. So that's how we graft them. We use a 1-cotyledon graft, and they've developed this company in North Carolina. They're the company that is also related to all those 3 fumigant companies that came together down in North Carolina, Reddit, and all of them. This is the same company. It's just their plant division. But what we were interested in, since the plants cost 3 times as much, can we use fewer plants since they're more robust? Also, they don't need as much nitrogen because they're more robust. So could we reduce our nitrogen and reduce our plant populations? Well, depending on the variety. With 7187, we could lower our nitrogen and lower our plant populations and get the highest yields. Not every variety is going to work this way. Fascination, certainly if we lowered our plant population, it gave us our highest yields. But the nitrogen didn't work the same. So a lot of work we need to do here to see if we can how we can adapt grafted plants to Delaware. Another issue we've had is the rootstock on these. If they're not grafted properly, the rootstock can regrow. We had a field in Delaware that happened to this past year, and it's just useless then because all you have is a squash field or a bottle gourd field, which you don't want to have that. Since 2010, I've been working on hollow heart, and we've pretty much definitively found that this is a pollination disorder, not a cultural practice disorder, not too much nitrogen. So how we do this is I'll plant a field, I'll put a pollinizer here, and then I'll just plant seedless on either side so that you're getting less and less pollen being transferred. And we'll see what happens when does hollow heart show up. And then I also use dense varieties, longer ones, smaller ones, and lower density flesh varieties. And what we found out, and that's what the disorder looks like. It's a void in the middle of the plant, middle of the fruit. And what we found is our dense varieties don't get hollow heart. Even if you limit pollen, they really don't get much hollow heart. On varieties that are less dense, they will, as we limit pollen, this is 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, so many feet from the pollen source, we're increasing hollow heart. So I've got good recommendations to industry. The industry's adopted them. Pretty much is to reduce problems with hollow heart. One would be more pollinizers in early plantings, managing your bees better to get good transfer, and then, when possible, shifting away from these susceptible varieties. We've looked at foliar fertilizer on watermelons and trying to confirm a little bit of Jerry Brust's work. We're seeing some yield benefits where we're using nitrogen with sulfur sources. So we're thinking we're getting some bang out of that sulfur. All right, move on to the next one. Yellow squash and zucchini. A little bit lower nitrogen. We still need good potassium levels. Do best on drip irrigation and mulch. Again, foliage health, what's the number one issue on summer squash? Powdery mildew. Number 2 issue, viruses. So in our recommendation book, you want to choose those that have good powdery mildew resistance and then a good virus disease package. We have squash bugs, cucumber beetles, and aphids as issues, and pollination, of course, is necessary with insects. Those are our classes. This is our recommendations in the book, but you want to look at your disease resistance. So here, Conqueror 2 has all the viruses, but it has a little green stem on the end, which may not be desirable. On our zucchinis, we have varieties with as much as 4 of those viruses. And so particularly for our late summer, our summer planted for fall harvest or late summer harvest, we need that virus resistance. So the industry continues to work on that. We do have some types here that are genetically engineered, so you have to watch out if you do have markets for that. And of course, we have a recent variety trial that's been done. These are some older variety trials, so we can, our recommendations of our book are based on variety trials in the region. All right, winter squash. Lots and lots of kinds of winter squash. Fairly low nitrogen, again, high potassium, but it's like pumpkins. You don't need much nitrogen. It grows very well on a cover crop and a no-till situation. And if we can get bush types, we would prefer that. Squash bug can be an issue, and so we want to choose those varieties for these particular qualities, uniformity, and then your market. Now, here's the question is, do you care whether or not your acorn squash has good sugars in it? Yes. Can you buy a good acorn squash in the grocery store? No. Why? Yes, they turn black, but they're not ripe. So Brent Loy, who's the breeder, he breeds this up in New Hampshire. He just really, he screams at the industry, you're picking them too early, you're picking them too early. They're never going to taste good. So that's been an issue. We have less disease resistance, but with that said, the downy mildew that goes to winter squash and pumpkins is not the same virility, and it comes in later than that goes to cucumbers. So we also have some good open pollinated varieties still left that are much cheaper to plant, and we have recommendations of all of these. So I'm not going to go through. Just suffice to say, there's a crap load of acorn squashes, and you can see the color types, delicata types. Spaghetti squash is a pretty decent mover, a pretty profitable crop. Not a lot of breeding being done with this, but they do have some smaller types available now. And then, of course, butternut's been a backbone of our winter squash with some of these varieties. That would be a processing type. Specialty ones, not going to go into that. And then our buttercup and kabuka. These kabuka or Japanese types are ones that you see quite often in markets.
They're delicious.
Yes, if, again, they've been properly left in the field long enough. Yeah.
The homeowners, squash bug, how do they come?
Now, you know when you're talking about squash vine borer.
Okay.
Yeah, squash vine borer is typically just a homeowner issue because if you have a whole field, they might tack a few on the outside and then they're done.
How do they combat that?
You have to have timely sprays right at the base of the plant starting second week in June through the third week in July, through the second week in July, E7, something like that. Otherwise, you just plant more than you need. They'll kill a few. That's a whole other conversation in itself. There's been interest in growing the tropical pumpkins, calabazas in our region, and we can talk more about that if you'd like to at some time. Pumpkins. We need powdery mildew tolerant, ideally powdery mildew resistant and heat tolerance. We want those handles to stay nice and firm. Powdery mildew will collapse those handles. We also find these grow really well on these cover crop based systems, so we're recommending that. Again, I've never sprayed anything more in my life than a pumpkin in recent years. It has all, it has all the diseases. It has, your fruit rots like black rot. You have your fusarium, all those fruit rots. You have gummy stem blight. You have the Plexisporium. There are just so many diseases. And then you get the insect problems too and viruses. Suffice to say, we have recommendations in here with the powdery mildew resistance. Just to finish up with some other crops. Cucumbers, here we want powdery mildew resistance, virus resistance. Those are two things we're looking at. And then downy mildew. The downy mildew that attacks cucumbers is very virulent and is the reason why homeowners can't grow them anymore. We have a lot of good selections for cucumbers with good resistance to a lot of different diseases. The one we just don't have is this downy mildew because it broke resistance back in 2003. We do finally are getting some varieties that have some resistance, and the industry is continuing to work to get this better resistance. Most of the cucumbers are gynoecious. They need a 5 to 15% pollinizer with male flowers in it. I work a lot with pickles, not going to go into it in detail, just to say that the industry is starting to move into parthenocarpic types. We do parthenocarpic pickle trials yearly. If you're interested in that information, come and see me. The other thing is they've gotten some downy mildew resistance into our pickling cucumbers. This 6404 would be an example. All right, ending up, what are our growing systems? Conventional systems are out there. We grow our pickles under a conventional system. But we're getting more and more. The region has a lot of no-till or strip-till based or mulch-based systems. Really good for growing things like pumpkin because it provides you with a clean fruit, reduced fruit rot. We do see some plastic culture that's really common for our cucumbers and our summer squash. One I've played around with is using the radishes to make a biological strip-till. This is what it would look like. Here you have cover crop on either side, and there's a strip where the radishes were that you would plant into. With that, I've got time for about 5 minutes worth of questions. This is a wild woolly trip down the cucurbits. And we've done a lot more work with watermelons, so if you're interested in any of our research, again, please come see me. We do pickle research, cucumbers, yeah. Yeah, where does seed come for seedless? The seedless watermelon is a cross between a diploid and a tetraploid, and so they actually have two crops that produce seed. They cross, but that triploid that is produced, so you have 4 chromosomes, 4 sets, 2 sets. When you cross them, they cannot. So that's their system. Now, a parthenocarpic cucumber It's seedless. There they treat it chemically. So they treat it with a chemical that initiates seed formation. And so it's done one of those two ways. Seedless watermelons is a bizarre system. That's one of the few out there that they use triploid and tetraploid and diploid. But a lot of like the seedless cucumbers, they have to use a growth regulator to treat them that actually cause. Other questions? Comments? You happy? Yeah. All right. All right. All right. We still have a few minutes. If you have any, come on up and I'll talk to you individually.